Okay, what's up, everyone? This is my first time using the OBS. This is a thing that people have been asking for a while. It's a screen capture. I can do stuff like this, move it around, and this is working. You should be able to see it. So, people have been telling me to bump the channel up to that next level. You need to be more professional. I actually tried to record this earlier doing the my phone looking at the interview and then reading it, and it was stupid. So anyway, this is the Adventures in Poor Taste. I think I've been here a couple times. It looks like a general pop culture site, and they caught Jim Shooter at the wow, this is so, look at this, Rhode Island Comic Con a couple weeks ago. So Jim Shooter, for people who don't know, he was the editor in chief of Marvel from like 79 to 86. He really made the modern era of not just Marvel but comics. When he came in, it was a bad time for Marvel. They were constantly rotating editors in chief. Editors or writers would be their own editor. I mean, it was really ridiculous. It was like a banana republic. Comics shops were only, or comics were only available at like the 7-Eleven grocery store. That was it. There was barely any comic shops. There wasn't the direct market. And then within 7 years later, everything has changed. So his era actually predates the supposedly big era of the 90s. But as we're going to see, his reign, tenure, whatever you want to call it, was even better. So this is a picture of him right here. And it's not letting me scroll in, whatever. But let me see if I can do it here. Now, I actually saw this guy in real life back in like 1991 or 92. When I first moved to New York City, he was crossing the street. Obviously, he was a lot younger back then. He had like a ponytail, black and gray hair. He's like 7 feet tall. He had an all-white suit, white vest, white tie, and a white cane. He looked like a Bond villain. The dude was scary. So anyway, it looks like they just caught him like a casual, just like walk up and like, hey, can I ask you some questions? So the guy asks him, what do you think about modern Marvel? And Jim Shooter says, I think they forgot what business they're in. Then he basically says, you look at the art, and the art is not in service of the story, it's in service of selling it on the secondary market. So then he talks about stuff like sales. He's like, sales right now are Marvel comics are $4 a piece. They're thrilled if they sell anything over 30,000. One thing I've noticed, and other people have picked up on this. Let me check if my stuff's actually recording. I'm a little nervous. Okay, it looks like it's recording. It looks like it's recording. Okay, so he says, when Marvel and like pros really started hammering on me, it's when I got to 40,000 subs. It was at that point where I had more subs than they had customers for most of their books, and I think they kind of felt kind of weird about that. So then Jim Shooter, he said, so then he says, Jim Shooter says of his time at Marvel, we had 75 titles. We didn't have a single one that sold below 100,000. So he's actually kind of describing one of the better years. He later had a policy of canceling books if they hit about 60, 65,000. But things improved on his watch. He opened up direct market. And yeah, even just like random books like freaking there was one called like US1. It was about truckers. Like everything sold 100,000 because it was sold at so many places. And he says, X-Men approaching 750,000. And he says, quote, and that's not some special number one or somebody dies or changes costumes or somebody gets married. It was every time. This is the Ann Nesenti days. This is when I talk about how much I don't respect the Milkshake Crew. But I grew up, and comics as an industry grew up when Ann Nesenti was in charge of X-Men, and it was, Chris Claremont and John Romita Jr. when he was just starting out, and Mark Silvestri, Paul Smith, and this book was freaking huge. It was a mainstream hobby. So then he talks about something funny. He's like, we didn't have to do variants. We didn't have to do gimmicks. He said the only variant we did by accident. It's like we couldn't decide whether for Peter Parker's marriage, wait a minute, a man and a woman, what? Please tell me one of them is trans, or I'm disgusted just on general principle. So he says we couldn't decide if people wanted the civilian version or the superhero version, so we made both versions, and we inadvertently created the variant market. Um, so then he talks about stuff like when he came. So, like I said, it was just this constant overhaul of just random writers and editors being put in the hot seat and then quitting or getting fired 6 months later. So then he says, one of the first things I did was get the books on time. We had books that were 6 months late, 6 months. So the thing about modern Marvels, they actually don't have books late because what they've done is they've totally dropped the quality. Axel Alonso, even though he got fired, he got credited for having two of the most profitable, not gross, but profit. And he did that by having a lot of books and having very, very low quality, low paid writers and artists. That's why they do things like sign Matthew Rosenberg to an exclusive. Matthew Rosenberg has no pedigree, but they're like, we're just going to lock him in for 3 years at this really low rate. And then when he asks for a raise, we'll just hire some other, mid-20s rube. So then he talks about how he created, he increased the rates. He created a thing where you could own 20% of the character you created, which has helped Bill Mantlo, his family. He created Rocket Raccoon. If you created a title, you got 1% of the title for eternity. So he did a lot of things that were very, and then you talk about this, like, listen to this. This is a quote. If you've got better people, sales go up and there's more money to play with. You don't even have to get better people. If word gets out that you can make money at Marvel, they just show up. Right? Okay, so end quote. This is the opposite now. Now that's DC. If you notice, DC people go to DC and they stay. Even if they're just kind of getting moved around from one-shots to short runs to villains, whatever, they stay. The money's good. I've talked to insiders. The money's good. The incentives are very good. So then this is more of a quote. We had some of the greatest talent. I don't think there's ever been a group of talent like that ever assembled, just an editorial. You had Archie Goodwin, maybe the best of all time, Larry Hama, Louise Simonson, Ann Nocenti, terrific and scary smart, just terrific people. We had great editorial, and you'd look up and down the hall, and there's Michael Golden, there's Bill Sienkiewicz, and Chris Claremont, and J.M. DeMatteis. It was a who's who in comics. One time we tried to figure out who we didn't have, and we came up with two names, George Perez and Jose Luis Garcia Lopez, two guys we wanted but couldn't get because they were both happy at DC. So we just got great people, and the ones that knew what they were doing. Oh my, okay, end quote. Papa bless. So there was a period of time in DC where the Justice League was like these random loser characters like Fire and Ice. Yeah, I know some people like Fire and Ice. And then Grant Morrison had the genius idea to put all of the characters people know in the Justice League in like the late 90s. And it was a huge hit. This is the basic thing. He's like, we had this crazy idea. We got a whole bunch of talented people. Marvel has decided to be post-talent. At least the Axel Alonso era it is. Axel Alonso famously had problems with artists. I mean, Darwin Cook, who everyone loves, basically was trying to get him to fight him. He despised Alonso so much. So then he goes, I got out of their way and tried to help the younger guys and make sure it's on time and preach. Story, story, story. What? Isn't politics in there? Isn't calling the fans Nazis in there? What, just story 3 times? That's pretty bigoted. Before me, everything was like a soap opera and just went on forever, and occasionally there'd be some resolution. But it's just never-ending stuff. I said, people buy this unit of entertainment. There better be a story there. Nobody had to tell Walt Simonson that, but all the young guys wanted to do soap opera stuff. So he talks, New Mutants is becoming a movie. He talks a little bit about Jean Grey. This is stuff you can get anywhere else. But this is some really great stuff. So he talks about this story, which is kind of the famous story of Hank Pym hitting Janet Van Dyne, the Wasp. Now, it was written that he accidentally hit her. The writer or the artist drew it as it was a straight shot, and then they just put it out there with just saying, okay, we'll deal with his consequences. But he said it's pretty intense. Like when you make a story, it has an effect on the audience, and then you have to deal with that. SJW era Marvel has completely abdicated themselves from the responsibility. They put Captain America as a Nazi, and then they go, "Oh, why are you angry? You must be a Nazi too." It's like, no, hell no. This is wrong on the face of it. This is wrong, especially when you got into why Nick Spencer, who is a far left ideologue with very anti-American views, why is that guy ever on Captain America? It's absolutely ridiculous. So then this is the one that I'm going to read this entire paragraph without comment because it's so good. So he says, "I just saw the Wonder Woman. It was good. I liked it. And I heard people say, well, it's not the original Wonder Woman. Here's the deal. If you go out and ask 1,000 people to tell you everything they know about Superman, you'll hear the same things. Daily Planet, Lois Lane, Clark Kent, blah, blah. You'll never hear about Mr. Mxyzptlk or even the Fortress of Solitude. Anything 1,000 people say, keep that. Don't mess with that. Anything that 1,000 people don't say, you get a little flexibility. Wonder Woman was created during the war, so she has the red, white, and blue with stars, you know? No one cares about that. When you ask about people about Wonder Woman, you're lucky if they come up with Amazons. So they made some graceful changes and it was fine. It doesn't have to be a red, white, and blue suit. So to me, people are just cavalier about ignoring the intentions of the original creators, ignoring the equity that was built up over the years. It's, I'm in charge now, so I'll do anything I damn well please. And that's almost always a mistake. When Walt did Thor, he didn't reboot it or throw away the past. He just made good. This is so beautiful. And this is going directly at guys like Nick Spencer, who just said, you know what, I could never ever create a character like Captain America that meant that much to people, but I sure could destroy him. It's a very ugly way of looking at the world. And he talks about some other experimental type of things. You probably don't look at this black and white art and think Marvel, but that's the kind of stuff Marvel did. So then he talks about the some of the current stuff. I mean, he's 66. He's old, but he's not that old. He's vital. He seems like the type of guy you get him as a consultant at any major company, and you're going to get some good stuff out of it. But anyway, I'm going to wrap this one up because I'm kind of nervous that it wasn't recording, but I think it did. Anyway, tell me what you think about Jim Shooter. I know there's stories about people not liking him. Now there's stories about him rough. He basically, he was a very strong leader, so he had to crack the whip sometimes. But I mean, the industry would not be the way it is. It wouldn't have, all these great storylines by Chris Claremont, Frank Miller, Daredevil Born and Good, Daredevil Electric, all that stuff without Jim Shooter. So tell me what you think about this video. Subscribe. Make sure you're still subscribed. Hit the bell for notifications. Thanks to everyone giving to the Super Chat and the Patreon. You're funding original content, and I'll have more videos up tomorrow. Probably. Thanks. Bye.